Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for staying with us. You're still watching Newsnight. Now, we're still on the U.S. strike on Sokoto State. We have Air Commodore Balogun, ex-Nigeria Air Force fighter pilot, joining us in the studio. And also joining us virtually is David Otto, who is a global counterterrorism consultant. Thank you, both of you gentlemen, for joining us on Newsnight, and compliments of the season to you. Okay, so as a retired Nigeria Air Force officer, let me start with you. Air Commodore Balogun, retired. It's still vague, the extent of Nigeria's collaboration with the U.S. In this strike on Sokoto State. Yeah. First, let me establish your thoughts, what you've seen so far on this U.S. strike, and are you clear on Nigeria's level of collaboration in the strike?
Yeah, that's what we heard. The Americans say we collaborated. Even the Nigerian side said yes. It's unfortunate that he had to get to this level, but it's not unusual. In the war against terrorism and banditry, things like this, you need help. We've been on this trail for the past 15 years. So, even before now, they had assisted in the past. I remember during the days of the Chibok girls, the US always available, they were there. The British and the French people came to assist us in locating the Chibok girls. But then, at that time, there were no kinetic measures.
Right.
They only gave us intelligence, which helped at least to locating where the girls were inside Sambisa forest. But for us to have asked for this assistance now, the kinetic way, yes, in global geopolitics, when you are not able to do some things, you are free to ask for help.
Right.
So we have asked for help, and help has come. So I don't see anything unusual about it, because other nations do. You have the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that assist their neighbors everywhere. Currently, they are working with the Ukraine. So it's not something unusual for us to seek for assistance. And then the assistance we have received so far, it's not that they came unilaterally. They came with our permission. We work with them. So there's nothing strange. We have a challenge, and we ask for solution to the challenge, and they have assisted us. I have nothing against it. It's right. And then we should work more so as to get rid of these guys from Nigeria, and then Nigeria can be more peaceful.
Okay, let me bring in David Otto, joining us via Zoom in the U.S. there. Well, you've listened to retired Air Commodore Balogun. He's saying, look, there's nothing strange about calling for help and getting this kind of collaboration. He also mentioned NATO's support of Ukraine. And here we are, the Russia-Ukraine war is still very, very much ongoing. Your thoughts on this U.S. intervention, and how much impact really would you say this first intervention has had? Because we're hearing on the one hand it's symbolic. Is it strong enough as a symbolic measure?
Well, I think you've got to understand that since 9/11, the United States policy has always been very clear. That it will target, anyone that is linked to either ISIS or Al-Qaeda at the time, and that it will not make any distinction between these terrorist groups or any country where they operate within. And this is clearly, has been a policy that subsequent U.S. administrations have followed. Remember that just under a month, President Trump made it very clear that, Nigeria was now labeled a country of particular concern, and that meant, as a result of the fact that the United States had identified what it described as a genocide against Christians, according to the United States, carried out by Muslim terrorists, as the case may be from the U.S. perspective. That has been something that has been well debated. But remember that from an operational or airstrike point of view, the U.S., this is not the first country that the U.S. is carrying out what it describes as precision military airstrikes against ISIS locations. It has done that in Yemen, in Somalia, it has done that in Libya, and several other countries that we've seen. It's not also the first time that the US is carrying out such kind of an operation within Nigeria. Remember that at one point, there was a US citizen that was kidnapped, and the US intervened in that. Now, is this particular situation, is it an international collaboration between the US and Nigeria? We know that both authorities have met recently in Washington, but also in Nigeria, to discuss various ways of collaboration. Immediately after the US designated Nigeria as CPC, a country of particular concern. So what we're seeing now is a strike, which the US has announced. But before, one even decides or talks about what the impact is, you've got to understand that any military strike against a target has a process. And this process is, what you describe as an ISR, which is an intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance process. It would take from one identifying the terrorist group itself. In this case, the US has said it's an ISIS group. It didn't say Boko Haram. Perhaps, it's referring to the Lukarawa group. That's one process which has to be discussed between both countries. The second process is actually selecting the target that needs to be hit. And usually this is something that it must be done between both countries. And I would assume that this was a process that was done between Nigeria and the USA. Then, of course, you have the monitoring of the target. So in this case, you'd have to monitor the target, ensure that you have the right in place. And then, of course, you select the kind of, strike that you would launch against that target, taking into consideration whether it's a civilian population or whether it's an urban or rural area. Then, of course, you get your authorization, which gives legitimacy for the US to carry out that strike within Nigeria. And then, of course, you would launch the strike. And even before that, you can discuss the casualty level. So there's a very fine process, that goes through. And so when the US says that it has carried out this strike and Nigeria accepts that, it was in collaboration with the US, the question now that one needs to ask is, what role did Nigeria play? Is it just the intelligence aspect, or was Nigeria responsible for launching the missiles? But we now know from information that these missiles were launched by the US, in 6 different locations. The big question is, what is the impact of this? Are there any high-value targets that were targeted by these missile airstrikes? The US hasn't mentioned any of that. Nigeria has not mentioned that. But the key question, or the key takeaway here, is that the US is demonstrating that, one, it can carry out these attacks wherever and whenever it likes, in line with its US policy of a global war against terrorism. Over.
All right, thank you very much for that contribution, David Otto. I'll still come back to you, but let me come back to Air Commodore Balogun here. On that question of why a place that's not necessarily known for terrorist activities, talking about Sokoto State and not Borno, that's been the epicenter of terrorist activities, Zamfara, Plateau in the north central, in the north, of course, the northeast, and all of that. Why those places? And usually, what is the standard operational procedure before an external force, can come in to a country and carry out this kind of strike? Because we heard from Tuga, the foreign minister, that he was on the phone with the U.S. authorities for about 19 minutes before they struck, and for about 5 minutes he informed President Tinubu. He was on the phone for about 5 minutes with President Tinubu. What is the usual MO in carrying out this kind of strikes?
Yeah, before such actions are carried out, you must sit down and look at the overall situation. And then strategic decisions are taken. We, at this level, may not know. I've been out of service, so I'm not inside there. But then there must be a reason why such places were taken. But then your reporter, the guy around there, mentioned 2 places.
Yes, Tangaza.
Yeah,
yes.
Yabo and the other place.
Yes,
and he said that was a route. The second place was a route. It couldn't define the first place that was attacked. Now, if it was a route, part of strategies of war is to break the lines of communication of your enemy. If it was a route and you deny them that route, that means whatever they were getting through that route will be cut off. And like we always say, look for the source of funding. When you are fighting war, there are a lot of things you are considering. How do they survive? Where do they get the food? How do they get fuel, funding? So you must cut off all those areas. So for them to have taken such decisions and say, let's attack here and there, and we are lucky that the first place,
no casualty.
The second place, we are yet to confirm. But there must have been some strategic implications before you carry out such attacks.
Right.
You must have considered, you won't waste such munition on nonsense. You must look at the importance of such places. But then who are we fighting?
Right.
Terrorists, bandits, who are highly mobile. They can be here 5 minutes, the next minute they are gone. So even if they were not there at that time, maybe the previous intelligence has said they were there.
In points.
Yes.
Hey, right.
And since they were working with Nigerians, they are not working in isolation. They must have coordinated those things with the Nigerians. But like I said, those guys are never static. They are always on the move. So if you don't get them today, that does not mean you will not get them tomorrow.
Right.
We have had such things in the past and we let go, and tomorrow is another day.
But do you think this strike sends a strong signal to these terrorists? Will
Very
they
much
be
so.
on their way, scampering in different
Very
directions?
much, it's a psychological warfare.
Right.
That wherever you are, we can get you. So even if we did not get anybody today, that means you have nowhere to hide, because Nigerians are now working with external sources who will quickly pinpoint your location. So whatever it is sending some signals to those guys that desist from what you are doing, or else we will get you.
The sustainability of this collaboration,
Yes.
what kind of collaboration really would Nigeria be providing? Would Nigeria be carrying out strikes too? Or we've been told by the Nigerian authorities that we provided intel that the U.S. used in carrying out this strike. In collaborating, this kind of collaboration, give me a clear picture of what the collaboration really looks like.
Now they must work together. We know the terrain better than them.
Right.
They have better technology to pinpoint targets, but then they must still work with us, because we will know the ground, because we have people on the ground who will say, don't attack here because of social reason.
Right.
You help us in these places. Like I said, during the Chibok rescue, I was fortunate to be part of the team that worked with them. And they were telling us what they want to do, and we'll say, no, you can't do this, but you can do this for us, which is the way it should be. Once we are on the same table and we are working on the same page, they work with us, we tell them what we want. We want assistance, but we determine the kind of assistance we want them to provide.
Okay, David Otto, let me quickly bring you back in. This collaboration, in your earlier intervention, you did mention Yemen, where the U.S. has intervened. You mentioned Somalia and a few other places. And the reason why a number of Nigerians are on edge about this U.S. strike, intervention, if you like, is that the U.S. has hardly succeeded in the different places where they've intervened in the past. So what's the guarantee that the set objective will be achieved with this strike in Sokoto, Nigeria? Do you have such concerns, or how confident are you that the U.S. intervention will actually, achieve the objective?
Well, I don't think the objective of the U.S. airstrike is to totally eliminate the jihadists that operate within that region. That's entirely something that the Nigerian authorities have to own. Targeting a particular location like Jabu or Sokoto is not targeting the entire locations where jihadist movements operate within Nigeria. We know that the Nigerian Air Force is doing a great job in terms of carrying out airstrikes itself, and I think that will continue to do that. I think what the US is doing is, doing what is, it's a special operation. It's not a permanent engagement, in my opinion. They haven't said that, as of yet. But I think what is important is to understand that for the United States, this airstrike, it's quite critical, but also the location. Remember that the U.S. narrative has always been that it is carrying out these airstrikes, to protect Christians. I'm not entirely convinced of that narrative, but if you look at the timing, which was a Christmas day, usually a day that is celebrated by Christians worldwide. This is a demonstration from the U.S. president. It's a bad gift or bad Christmas present to the Islamic State, so-called, by sending out this airstrike, but also by selecting this particular location in Sokoto, which is, the home of the famous caliphate. Does demonstrate that perhaps from a U.S. perspective, this is a strike against an Islamic movement which operates within an Islamic location, something which the Nigerian authorities have fought fiercely to disregard. But I think from a global strategic point of view, the U.S. Is there to assist Nigeria. Nigeria should be the one leading these operations, especially when it comes to intelligence sharing. But I think a lot of Nigerians would be, the questions that we want to ask is, how much engagement, was there by the Nigerian authorities, and what are the results, achieved, by this? Were there any terrorists killed as a result of this, or was this just one expensive missile or expensive missiles? If knowing that there were many of them that the U.S. has launched, to create a particular statement. So we are yet to see any real impact. The U.S. did not mention any high-value targets, as I said in the beginning. Neither has Nigeria made any statement in terms of any particular terrorists that were killed. So it's still open to further investigations in terms of what this achieves in the long term.
Let's look at the wider picture, the long-term implication of this. Let me stay with you, David Otto. Is Nigeria's sovereignty at stake here? Because do you agree with those who are saying that this does show that Nigeria, number one, is on an uncharted path when it comes to the war against terrorism? And does it come at a cost, like laying down the sovereignty of Nigeria? Are there implications as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, so you've got to make a distinction between striking a criminal organization, which would be in the case bandits. If the U.S. were to strike bandits, then that would be an infringement, because the Nigerian authorities owns that location. But when you're talking about an international terrorist organization like ISIS, which is straight from the ISIS that we know in Raqqa and Syria, which was linked to the Al Qaeda that launched an attack against the U.S. In 9/11. There is no breach of sovereignty in that aspect, especially and in particular to the fact that the Nigerian authorities have acknowledged that this was a joint operation between the Nigerian security services and the United States. We know that several Nigerian authorities, including the National Security Advisor, has been to the U.S. The U.S. has also been to Nigeria to discuss various ways of engagement. So the idea that this was done as a breach of the Nigerian sovereignty, it's something that the Nigerian authorities themselves have made very clear that this is not the case. So I don't think the U.S. has or operated outside breaching any international laws, because of course the Nigerian authorities have said, again, as I mentioned, that this was a joint operation. And remember that the U.S. warned before, just a month before, that they're going to do this. Discussions have been had, at diplomatic level. So I don't see any breach of sovereignty rights. What I see here is the fact that the Nigerian authorities came second in terms of announcing. They were playing catch up, in terms of the narrative, while the U.S. was, putting forward its interest by saying it has, it has had strikes against Christians to protect Christians, against Muslim terrorist organization. From the Nigerian point, terrorists have been killed, and irrespective of whether these terrorists, are Christians or Muslims, for the Nigerian authorities, this is this is a reduction in the capabilities, but we don't know yet, if there were any casualties. So it's still hanging in the air.
Okay, David Otto, you mentioned the point that Nigeria was actually playing catch-up in announcing that strike to the world. In 30 seconds, is it a concern for you, before I come back to ex-NAF fighter pilot here? Does it matter at all that the U.S. announced this first before the Nigerian authorities?
Well, I think the reasonable thing, for any Nigerian would be that any terrorist airstrikes or any strikes against terrorist targets, would be announced first by the Nigerian authorities. But we know how the U.S. operates. The U.S. It's a much more bigger, party here, in terms of its capabilities. And I just think it's a 1-0, to the U.S. against Nigeria in terms of communication strategy here.
Thank you very much. Air Commodore Balogun, we've heard from the Nigerian authorities that Nigeria has not ruled out further joint strikes. Do you think this is a template that we should apply to every other part of the country? Northeast, for example, Northwest, North Central, and of course, maybe in other parts of the country. Do you expect that the U.S. Should be able to carry out these strikes effectively? And what would be the implications of that?
Thank you very much. I think this should serve as a wake-up call to our security agencies.
Right.
What have they brought on board? The Americans? Yeah, they struck. From way back in the Gulf of Guinea, they launched the missile from Tomahawk. Yeah, they have the capability. But we are in Nigeria. Surveillance capability we do have. Tactical powers to be able to handle these guys we have.
So what's missing?
What is missing for me is been political meddlesomeness in security. That's what been debarring the armed forces from going all out to do their job. Once we are able to separate politics from security, then the military will get the job done. They have all it takes. In my opinion, we have all that is required to do the job. But then we have most of the time mixed politics with security, and that's why the military is so handicapped to doing what they are supposed to be doing. When we fought in Liberia and Sierra Leone, we didn't have that. It was go and do this. We don't listen to anybody.
Right.
But today in Nigeria, somebody is pleading on behalf of bandits, on behalf of terrorists. We never had that. It was one person. This is the target, we go all out. But here now the military cannot do that because of other political considerations. Even the federal government.
I wonder, will this be a morale booster for our military, that external forces are having to come to, carry out these strikes?
If I remind you a bit that when we declared state of emergency in the Northeast in 2013, 2014, state of emergency, we still kept the politicians there. So what happened to the military? Because it wasn't a total state of emergency.
Yeah.
So the military guys did not know what to do. Do they listen to the politicians on ground, or do they take the instruction from the president, who had declared state of emergency, but the same president kept the politicians in place? So politics, I kept saying,
right.
I don't know whether democracy is a blessing to us or democracy is a curse, because we mix democracy with security and defense.
That's a whole different conversation,
Yes.
and we'll have to leave it there.
Please.
Air Commodore Balogun, ex-Nigeria Air Force fighter pilot, thank you very much for joining us. And David Otto joined us via Zoom in the US there as a global counterterrorism consultant. Thank you very much, both of you, for your insights on Newsnight tonight.